So, yesterday, I had an article sent to me by a friend that included a video of Matthew McConaughey talking about his ideas for the 2020 election. So, basically, the article, oh, let me go back to the article. The the video that was included in the article was Matthew McConaughey on 2020 election, time to get constructive, embrace the situation. The article itself I found was kind of interesting because he, um, the article title was Matthew McConaughey speaks out about his faith in Hollywood on podcasts, and apparently he went on to the Joe Rogan podcast, so I'm probably going to listen to that. I have not listened to that yet, but I do like to listen to Joe Rogan sometimes when, particularly when he has guests that I'm interested in. I've listened to quite a few of his podcasts, but I don't necessarily listen to everyone. Um, and the article talks basically about his experience. So Matthew McConaughey wrote a book called Green Lights, and the article is recounting kind of him talking about how he's had interacted with his faith and how he's dealt with that in Hollywood and because he's apparently a very outspoken Christian, which I found interesting because it's not something I knew about him, but I don't generally go around trying to figure out what religion people believe in, so I don't actually know a whole bunch about Matthew McConaughey. This is the first time I've ever actually looked into him at all. I mean, other than I really like his acting and I think he's super hot, but that's not really knowing anything about people. So I found it interesting that he's he talks about how he's encountered situations where he's seen people where he knows that they are Christian because he's prayed with them, etc., and they like at times won't stand when God is mentioned in a thank you speech or whatever. And I just found it interesting because this article and then the video that is embedded in the article are different. They're talking about completely different things. He doesn't even really mention his faith at all in the video part they did on, and this is a Fox News video, by the way, which I'll put the link in so you can go watch it yourself and read the article as well. And he talks. They ask him a few questions. There's three moderators, basically, or interviewers or whatever, asking him some questions. And he talks a little bit about his family history. He talks about his brothers. He has a kind of a neat, funny story about his middle brother who was apparently adopted. And then they play this clip from 2017 where he specifically says, like, it's now it's the reality, that he is our president and it's time for us to get constructive with him. And I really like that he used that language. I think that when it came back to his current live interview, present time, his tone changed a little bit, and he kept saying, well, right now it's 2 weeks before, so we're in a time where we can be relative. But once the election is done and our new commander-in-chief is established, will be the time to get constructive. And he didn't say with that person again. So I don't know, I don't know exactly how he's planning to come out. Because when they asked him who he's planning to vote for, he opted not to answer. One of the other things, one of the interviewers said that really kind of struck a chord with me was that, she was always taught that we pray for our leaders no matter what. And the reason that struck a chord is because I remember the night that Trump was elected. I had not voted for Hillary. I voted for Jill Stein. But I also lived in California, so the likelihood that Hillary was not going to win California was pretty low. So it was a safe opportunity for me. And it's not the first time I've voted independent party or away from the Democratic or Republican side. But it was a safe vote for me because I for sure did not want Trump to win. I didn't imagine in a million years he would have won. I was shocked and dismayed I cried. I could not believe that he was going to be our president. But I remember talking with my kids about it not too long afterwards and telling them, I am not going to bet against him. I'm not going to hope that he fails, because that means that I'm betting against our country. I'm betting against my best interest. I hope he does great. I hope he goes out there and knocks it out. And, to be honest, there's a lot of controversy about what he's done well and what he hasn't done well. And in some ways, I think he's done some really great stuff for this country as a whole, but there's some stuff he's done that has been really divisive and difficult to deal with. And when Matthew's talking about it, he talks about winning a clean election, and that's my biggest desire right now too. Is that we have an election where everybody feels like the decision is legal and fair, whether we like the outcome or not. And I don't know how that's going to play out, but we'll see. And then they start talking a little bit about the COVID-19 as it's being politicized. And it's funny because he talks about, we're in this time where it's really hard to balance between our economic welfare and our biological survival. And I think that is I loved that he used that as a point, because I have, because it's not just economic welfare and biological survival. It's like mental health and, physical. I mean, the biological survival part goes with the physical health too, but there's a lot going on. I've talked with both my kids in the last couple of days on two different angles in this particular aspect, which is, with my son, my daughter and I had a little bit of a discussion about me getting a test, because we had talked about me going to California with her. She's actually on the road right now, so I'm a little bit in nervous mode. And I did not want to go get the COVID process, to the process to get tested to see if I have COVID or not. I don't want to do that unless it's absolutely required by some sort of something that requires it, not just it's a good idea because I'm traveling. And Chance and I were discussing it, and it kind of evolved into a discussion about how I have a great concern about the media angle and bias and agenda, and and I've had to be, I feel like I regularly have to say, I don't think there's a boogeyman out there that is purposely behind the scenes. I think I've said this before, manipulating the situation with some evil plot to destroy the world. I think what we're experiencing really is a lot of opportunists. We're seeing people who are and it's on both sides. And Matthew McConaughey actually talks a little bit about it too, where the messaging always seems to be spun to whoever's point that, whatever agenda of the person who's trying to make the point. And I agree. I think there is a lot of companies and organizations that are out there taking this fear of being sick and dying. My daughter, when we were talking about the mask, or me going to get the process to see if I tested positive for COVID, the procedure, I guess, is the better word. She even said, one of my points is that the numbers aren't, for me, the outcomes are not indicative of the measures that we've put in place, and the problems that have arisen from this, including people's mental health and people's economic, competency, their financial stability. And she said, well, and I said, the number of deaths that, the percentage of that is so small. And she goes, but Mom, all those lives matter. And I go, I agree. But what about all the lives that we're supposed to be living today? Don't those matter too? Shouldn't the fact that I'm like having to drain my savings be a concern that is being addressed within all of the decisions on how we're going to handle this? Shouldn't the fact that I'm feeling funky and depressed, like a lot of times, like I get into a funk for a couple days and I'm just like, meh, shouldn't that be something that should be of concern? And when he talked about, that we need to be finding solutions that balances between the economic welfare and the biological survival, I thought that was really important. And then he says, which I loved, and it made me do a little more digging into a couple things, was that he's like, as an aggressively centric person, I'm saying we need to come together as a country. We can do it better. And so I consider myself eccentric. I've used this word to describe myself. And so I went to look it up a little bit just because I'm curious what other thoughts are on this. And I found something called the Nolan chart, which I thought was pretty interesting because it kind of shows that it's an idea that shows it's not just left or right, that there's other dynamics into like political ideology. So I thought that was pretty interesting. But I did it, you can look up the definition of centricism, and basically it's just the Wikipedia has it as, it's the political outlook or specific position that involves acceptance or support of a balance of a degree of social equality and a degree of social hierarchy, while opposing political changes which would result in a significant shift of society strongly to either the left or the right. So this does still kind of make it seem like I'm just somewhere in between on a singular line between left and right. And the Nolan chart did a little bit, shows a little bit more how there's different dynamics, and I felt like that more describes kind of how I feel. I have a community mindedness. I also have individual rights mindedness, and I do think that we should find a balance between strict government and social and have social programs that really assist folks in need to a point. So I definitely fall somewhere in this category, and I'll include that link so you can take a look at it. But I just thought that was an interesting point. And then they round out the COVID talk with this idea that because of what's happening, we are becoming closer with our families. And, they talk about how, you don't, instead of having parents rushing out the door to work, they're waking up in the morning. I certainly have spent more time with my kids, my granddaughter. There's been, even though my daughter and granddaughter moved out of the house, they come over and we hang out. It does feel like there has been some positiveness in tightening our relationship, our nuclear relationship, which is not a bad thing, and it's given me an opportunity. I have been doing some almost weekly calls with my aunts, and getting having an opportunity to get to know them better and talk with them. I have one aunt that lives in Wisconsin and one that lives in Illinois, and we've been doing I would say more like every other week type Zoom meetings, and I've had multiple calls with my grandpa. So I definitely see that there's been some positive aspect to helping us, a lot of people, and I have felt this personally, build some tighter relationships. But I guess the thing that video / article really kind of brought out of my thoughts were how many people really are kind of in the same boat. Like, I, for 100% sure this year, at this election, I will not be voting for Trump or Biden. I'm in Arizona now, so that's different because my vote could actually be part of deciding what color this state is. And unlike California, where it's, I can't imagine anytime in the near future that California is going to switch to purple and certainly not red. Even though it was really funny, a little side note, my daughter was on the phone with her friend who lives in San Jose the other day, and I guess there was some sort of a demonstration of Trump folks in a parking lot at Valley Fair. And if you live in San Jose or you've been to, San Jose, you might have been to Valley Fair. It's kind of in the center. It's kind of like in the hub because you got Santana Row there too. And I guess her friend was like, I wanted to call and report them to the police. And so Les and I had a discussion about where assembling as a group is legal. And we talked about being on private property versus public land, etc. And it was just, I thought it was interesting because my daughter was like, I don't even understand why Trump people would demonstrate in California. There's no way California is ever switching red. And I kind of laughed and I said, I don't think it's about necessarily trying to switch the color of the state as much as it is about demonstrating a support, because there are people in California who voted for Trump. It happened. But that was a little aside that I thought was kind of a funny discussion I had with my daughter the other day. But so back to my question. How many people are like struggling with this? Like, I don't want to get into, I'm not fighting to defend Trump or fighting against Biden or fighting against Trump or fighting for Biden. I'm about wanting to see a decisive election that is going to, as Matthew McConaughey said, lead us into 2021 knowing who our commander-in-chief is and having a genuinely good, safe, positive transition, whether it's a transition to new power or it's a transition into a second term, whatever that ends up being. And that I also think that I would like to see this country come together and find a way to be constructive with our leadership. Because if everything that you're seeing and hearing is negative, it's hard to find a way to feel like being supportive. But if we're not supporting our leadership, even if we don't agree with it, I've been in lots of positions, employment-wise, education-wise, where I did not agree with what the leadership was doing. There's been multiple times when new policies and procedures were being laid out by the upper echelons of whatever company I was working for, and I was literally like, this is dumb. Why are they doing this? This makes zero sense. But they're the leadership. So I have to figure out how to get on board and do what's required and do what's expected. And I think that all the fighting that we've been doing over the last 4 years has made it difficult for us to actually have a positive experience. And I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of pushback on that because, everybody who's on one side wants to blame Trump and everybody who's on the other side wants to blame progressive Democrats. I think that everybody in the situation right now is to blame because instead of trying to figure out how to work together, we're busy pointing fingers and, hoping that the other side messes up and we can stomp on their neck and tell them how bad they are and constantly, have messaging about the evils of this side and the stupidity of that side and da-da-da-da-da, it goes on and on and on. So I guess I'm curious, how many of you out there are somewhere in the center, somewhere in the like I'm more concerned with having more stability as a greater community in this country than I am in making sure one side or the other wins. And that's kind of where my thinking is at this point, is I'm more interested in seeing us come together as a country and figure out how to work together than I am in than I care about who wins this election. Because I don't think it matters who wins this election. We're going to have a hard time. Half the people are not going to like it and half the people are going to like it. Like that's, I mean, based on how people vote. But the reality is I think there's a whole bunch of us in the middle that are just voting one way or the other because we don't want to, quote unquote, waste our vote. And I'm not going to waste my vote anymore. I'm going to only vote for candidates that I believe in. And I think that is the start, is really standing up for what you believe in instead of simply voting for the lesser of two evils. So that's what I got to say. What do you have to say? My sister's calling me, and that's what you keep hearing in the background, so I guess I got to go get on this phone before she calls me back again. All right, y'all. Take it easy. We'll talk to you soon.